G'day guys, welcome back to round two's edition of Just the Tips. It's good to be back in the swing of things. You may have noticed that I'm changing up the format a little bit this year, doing a bit of a review video each Monday, ideally, record that each Sunday night. And Just the Tips, which used to be on a Tuesday every week last year, probably going to make that more of a Wednesday type operation. So just sort of splitting up the content into two separate videos, rather than trying to jam it all into the footy tipping video every single week. It was an enjoyable round one, I thought. I'm not just saying that, I actually thought the quality of football was really good and we had some really good games, and like I said, you can see all my thoughts summed up in a previous video. And of course, I've been on the Drew Footy Show, which is back for 2022 as well, so go check out Drew's channel and you'll see my face on his channel every Tuesday. I believe he's going to upload, and it's kind of like a podcast style video week to week on AFL. So this being a footy tipping video, of course I'm going to get back into shouting out the weekly winners of our footy tipping competition. If you're not part of the footy tipping competition, you can go check out the link in this video. It's in the description somewhere. Now, you don't have to use a password to sign up, so if that requires a password, which some people are giving me that feedback, I think there's some sort of glitch. Maybe try again a little bit later. All you need to do is click the link and then hit join, and then you're part of the comp. And same goes for the fantasy competition below as well, guys. The invite code is in the description of this video. I personally got 7 out of 9 correct tips, and I think that has put me at about 46th out of, I think there's about 1,000 of us. Pretty happy with that. I think you'll remember from last year, I sat, I think mid-table by the end of it. For most of the year, I was definitely towards the nether regions of the table, unfortunately. Druzy, of course, beat me last year. However, pretty happy with the 7 out of 9. I got Collingwood wrong. I thought they would lose to St Kilda. Then I also tipped Richmond, I believe, to beat Carlton as well. So those are the two I got wrong. And as you would have seen in my review video, if you'd watched it, I did end up changing my tip from West Coast to Gold Coast after, I think, Shuey, Kelly and Ryan were confirmed out. But we have one person leading the footy tipping comp by the name of Capro, I think that's right. So 9 correct tips and the margin of 2. So that is outstanding tipping. And of course, being round 1, Capro is also leading the entire competition. Onto the fantasy side of things, and Mick Nah is leading the league with an impressive 21-27 in fantasy points in the opening round. That's a really good effort for when you've got a low budget when you start. So any score over 2,000, I would have thought, is pretty good. I think I'm like around the 100th out of 160 or something like that. Something very average, but I don't fancy myself at fantasy. Hopefully this year I can do a bit more of a respectable effort in the tipping though. Before we crack into round 2's tips, and there are some tasty matchups in that, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel if you are enjoying it. It still says that about 35% of you who watch the videos over the last month have not actually subscribed to the channel. So if you feel like doing me a favor, but also subscribing to some hopefully enjoyable AFL content, make sure you hit that red button. All right, without further ado, let's crack into round 2. You've got the Western Bulldogs and Carlton. This should be a pretty good matchup actually, especially considering Carlton were reasonably impressive against Richmond. Their midfield's looking a little bit deeper. Paddy Cripps sort of returned to form to some extent, and they've got a few more contributors there. And I don't know, this is starting to look like the year that Carlton may really make a name for themselves to some extent. They're coming up against the runners-up from last year, the Bulldogs, who got defeated, obviously, by the reigning premiers, Melbourne, in the opening game of the season. So hard to mark them too harshly, and at times they look like they were sort of dominating proceedings for a little bit before ultimately Melbourne were too good. So despite this being 17th versus 5th, I think I'm still going to go conservative here. I'd expect the Bulldogs should beat Carlton, but I'm expecting a pretty good game. I'll say 15 points, but there is a chance of an upset here. Next up, we have Sydney versus Geelong. This game was a ripper last year at the same venue at the SCG, where Jeremy Cameron was denied that mark for not 15, just about in the goal square, and the Swans ended up winning by 2 points. This is a real tough one. With the Swans having won last year, makes me inclined to tip them. The Swans were obviously too good for the Giants last week at Accor Stadium, I think it's called now, and the Cats, smashed Essendon. So even with the injury to Jeremy Cameron, I think the Cats will be slightly too good. I remember in that game, I feel like Geelong had a lot inside 50s last year, and Sydney were just took their opportunities better. So I'm going to say the Cats win a thriller by 11 points. Collingwood play Adelaide at the MCG in what is a bottom 4 clash when you look at last year's ladder, but I was very impressed with the Pies and the team brand of football that they played last week. A lot of youngsters in that team, but it still didn't stop them looking very, very ominous. Apart from that third quarter fade out where St Kilda nearly came back and pinched the game, Collingwood certainly don't look too far off the quality of teams I'm expecting to push for the 8. So they've really gone up in my estimations, and Adelaide sort of had the inverse. They had an amazing third quarter and nearly pinched the game against Fremantle, but despite the best efforts of Josh Rochelle playing an outstanding debut game, 5 goals, despite that, I don't think they showed me enough to really think they're going to beat Collingwood at the MCG. It is possible, but I think Collingwood have earned a bit of respect, not just with me, but everyone at the moment too, especially those who tipped them to finish low like I did. So I'll say Collingwood win this by 25 points. Essendon then play Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. This is an interesting one. Essendon were a little bit underwhelming in their opening game against Geelong. Obviously, a little bit undermanned, particularly in that forward half with no Tipping Woody, no Stringer. Nick Martin came in and kicked 5 goals, so maybe there's another avenue to go for him. But overall, didn't quite live up to some expectations I think people had of them going into this year. So hopefully they can dust that performance off. There's a good opportunity against Brisbane here, who again we consider a very strong team again. So it's an unlucky first 2 for the Dons to get quite a tough fixture to start the season. The Lions overcame a pretty spirited Port Adelaide effort, ultimately just running out the game better. It wasn't a massively impressive game in terms of skills, but like I said in that video, put that down a little bit to dew and maybe a bit of fatigue as well. So I think I'm going to have to back the Lions here. Obviously, they got the win in round 1, a little bit more convincing. I'm a little bit concerned about Essendon and see if they can snap out of that form. But they are the sort of team that will just snap out of form when you least expect it. So Brisbane should win this by 20 points. Next up, Port Adelaide, the team I just talked about, had a tough loss on the road to Brisbane. Some bad injuries out of that game, unfortunately, with Xavier Dersma's collarbone, Trent McKenzie, potentially an ACL. Haven't seen the latest news on that, but it didn't look good. And then Alir, probably most of all, is the one they're going to miss with, I think it's a syndesmosis injury as well. So a critical part of their key back structure gone, although with Hawthorn, they don't really have, a proven goal kicker yet. There's a bit of talent there, but I don't know if Alir out makes them vulnerable enough in this particular game. So while the Hawks got the job done against North last week, obviously the Roos are the wooden spooners, so I don't know how much to read into that game. I think Port Adelaide usually beat teams they're expected to beat at home. I'm going to tip Port Adelaide fairly comfortable here by 30 points. Next up, we have Gold Coast versus Melbourne. It's got it listed as Carrara here, so not Metricon Stadium, I presume. We talked about the D's already. They overcame the Bulldogs in a fairly reasonable performance by them. Some of their stars really performed well, although it came at the cost of Christian Salem, which is a blow, but I still think that team bats pretty deep. So this will be a massive test for the Gold Coast Suns. I don't know if they've got it in them to beat the D's. Obviously, they got the job done in Perth, and while I don't want to take too much credit from them, I said on the Drew Footy Show, I think the Eagles probably put out the weakest 18 to 22 players in the comp this round, so as much as I don't want to piss on their parade, I don't think Gold Coast have really passed the test yet, at least not to the extent where I expect them to beat the reigning premiers. So I think Melbourne's going to win this. Let's call it 35 points. Gold Coast will probably have flashes of this game where they look impressive, but I think the Demons are just far too good. Next up, we got the Sunday morning game, North Melbourne versus West Coast at Marvel Stadium. The Roos obviously went down to the Hawks by, I think it was about 4 or 5 goals in the end. I didn't catch this game admittedly, but from all reports, probably not the most impressive showcase of football from that particular round. So that's not unexpected. They're the wooden spooners from last year, and it's not a harsh mark against them that they didn't beat Hawthorn in round 1. The Eagles, availability crisis at the moment is fairly well documented, and so much so that I tipped us originally last week, and then when Kelly, Ryan and Shuey were all confirmed out, I quickly changed my tip. So I said on the Drew Footy Show, I think we've improved on last year's form. Around that time, North Melbourne beat West Coast in Perth. We were playing horrible footy, and I think we saw a big improvement in terms of our intent and stuff last year anyway. Some big ins are confirmed for West Coast this week. I believe that Tim Kelly's confirmed in, Liam Ryan and Jack Darling, and then there's a maybe on Luke Shuey as well, and someone like Witherden comes in probably to replace Hoff. Long story short, there's a lot of talent coming into this West Coast side that we sorely lack, and most of those guys had most of a pre-season. So call me biased, whatever. I expect us to win this game, to be honest. I think the Eagles are good enough to win this game, and if we lose this game, then that will change my opinion on us. But I think we will win this game, and I'm sure North fans will probably not be happy with that because they beat us last year, but I'll be shocked if we lose this, to be honest. I tell you what, I'm going to cop it if we lose that. Next, we have what I think is the penultimate game of the round, Richmond versus GWS at the MCG. This is a tough one to tip. Both teams went down somewhat narrowly last week. Richmond obviously went down to Carlton, who just overran them in the end. I think Richmond were doing well to, lead. I think it might have even been the start of the last, they were in front. Ultimately just ran out of legs and Carlton steamrolled them. And I've been talking a little bit about their lack of midfield depth and, with Prestia getting injured as well, that's going to be further into question. So I really don't know what to make about this. The Giants, I thought, were pretty good against the Swans without looking really impressive. The Swans were just genuinely had the answers when it mattered. And the game last week was all about momentum swings. And when Sydney had their momentum swing, they were, a lot more potent. There's a bit to like about both of these clubs. I think I had GWS high in my ladder prediction. And with the injury of Prestia, I can sense an away win for the Giants here coming up. But this would be exactly the sort of game Richmond click into gear and win. I think the Giants, I rate them more at the moment. And so logically, I should tip them, right? It's not easy, this one. This is the toughest one of the round. I think I'm going to tip GWS. I think I have to back in all the optimism I've had, but I've got a bad feeling this will make me look foolish. I'll say GWS by 11 points. Now, this, I believe, is the final game of the round. Fremantle hosting St Kilda at Optus Stadium. Last year, I think it was the final game of the year, St Kilda battered Fremantle, but I think the landscape's a little bit different now. There's a bit of optimism around Fremantle, but, against the Crows, they faded badly in that third term, and I think that has a lot of their supporters a little bit concerned going forward. If momentum lapses are going to happen and they get scored on so easily, what's going to happen when they play a team that, didn't finish bottom four last year? So I think they've got a few big ins. I think Darcy and Fife are confirmed or almost confirmed to come in this week. St Kilda, on the other hand, were fairly lackluster for most of the performance against Collingwood, but you do have to give credit to the Pies for, playing some pretty good football as well. But they had a really good third term. It showed what they're capable of. And if they bring that brand to this game for 4 quarters, they will win the game. But over the last couple of years, the trend with St Kilda has been just too little, too late, or, too few and far between when they're actually playing well. So I can't back them to beat Fremantle at Optus Stadium. This is in Perth, and Fremantle are, as you'd expect, better in Perth than they are away from home. So I'm going to tip the Dockers here to win by 21 points. So that's it, guys. That is what the ladder will look like at the end of that round if I get all of my tips correct, with Geelong on top of the ladder and my beloved West Coast back in 9th, where we belong. Interestingly, I have 5 teams on 0-2, one of them being Essendon, the finalist from last year, the rest being North, Richmond, St Kilda and Adelaide. And conversely, I had Collingwood, the team I predicted to win the wooden spoon. I predict them to go 2-0 this round. But there you have it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you would have done differently with your footy tips. What do you think is going to be the game of the round, and what do you think is potentially going to be upset of the round? Potential upset of the round for me is possibly Carlton beating the Western Bulldogs. And the games of the round for me are probably Sydney and Geelong and Richmond versus GWS, based on how hard they were to tip. But as always, guys, hope you're enjoying the content. I will be streaming this weekend North Melbourne versus West Coast at 10 a.m. Perth time, which means I think about 1 p.m. over East. So make sure you tune in, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the weekend, guys. Have a good one.